Taylor McHargue, who is a busy man, CBS Sports broadcast analyst, and was at the North Dakota State, South Dakota State game. And I said, Taylor, to you earlier, we've had the coaches on from both of those programs, but if North Dakota State calls just any FBS school and the football operation guy goes to the head coach and said, hey, oh, by the way, North Dakota State's on line one, and the coach would hang up on him. They are so good, and they dominated a good – what was it like to be a part of that broadcast?
Yeah, it was funny. I told some people this week, outside of the game itself, it was as much fun as I've had doing a game in my, 6 years of doing this. It was just unfortunate the game was a blowout. But once it kicked off, it got away from South Dakota State almost immediately. Their starting quarterback out for that game. But leading up to it, we stayed in Sioux Falls. The game was in Brookings. And it felt like, and I mean this in the best way possible, it almost had a little bit of like the Texas high school football kind of feel where it was important to everyone. And almost like your town shuts down for this game. And it was so unique and so special that, Brookings is a very small town in South Dakota, but you get into the kind of city lines of around the town, and it's all Jackrabbits gear. It's all blue and yellow, and everyone's going to this game. And we get there, and it's a sellout crowd. They set a new capacity record for attendance in that game. And again, once it kicked off, North Dakota State is unbelievable. I think they're the best team by a pretty wide margin, even when South Dakota State's fully healthy. I think that's, to your point, I think that's a team that there are a number of FBS schools that not just would lose to North Dakota State, but I think would lose by multiple scores. There are some Power 4 schools that would lose to North Dakota State. So I completely agree. I don't care who you are. North Dakota State and South Dakota State specifically, do not schedule those schools. If you are an FBS athletic director, it is not worth it.
Taylor, there is carnage in the coaching world all over the place. LSU, the latest. You cover the American Conference USA, the FCS well. Who are some of the guys that you think should get shots, even maybe at some of these bigger jobs, that are ready to be the next Lance Leipold or Kalen DeBoer that could take one of these programs that's looking for, I either want a guy who's been in the SEC or I want Lane Kiffin. They could find somebody that could be wildly successful given the resources.
Yeah, I'll give you three names, and I'll start with the one that is like the worst kept secret in the world. But I think Dan Mullen probably takes one of these jobs from UNLV. I don't know which one it is, but I think Florida fans, if they could do it over again, would probably say, you know what, we would take him back. I think Dan Mullen is a fantastic coach. I think there's going to be an opportunity for him to leave UNLV. And again, I don't know which one, but I think he's probably at top of the list for a number of programs. Two that are kind of guys that they have not taken the leap, or they haven't been at a P4 school yet, but that I think do an unbelievable job. John Sumrall at Tulane, I think, is one of the best coaches in the country. And I think if you look at how Sumrall has built his programs and how successful he was at Troy on the defensive side of the ball, they do the exact same thing at Tulane, and how the buy-in that he gets from his kids. I think that's something that there are a number of jobs that I think he would be a great fit for. Florida is the one that stands out to me. I don't know if he is a big enough name. I think that fan base, the names that they're throwing out, it sounds like, there's a report that they went after Freeman at Notre Dame. Who knows if that's even true, but that's the kind of name that you feel like that fan base wants. But I think Sumrall would be a fit for a place like Florida. I think he gets the South and recruiting, and I think does a phenomenal job with his roster management. And then the last one that is under the radar right now, and I don't know that he would leave yet, is Sean Lewis at San Diego State. Sean Lewis was at Kent State and got them to 2 bowl games, which if you follow college football and the G6 teams, getting Kent State to a bowl game is like winning a conference championship anywhere else. And I mean that sincerely. And the fact that he's got San Diego State, they're playing unbelievable. They've got 2 shutouts already this year and held another team to 3 points. Defense is phenomenal, and they completely overhauled their roster on the offensive side. I think he's a winner. He does it the right way. He is a program builder. And I think, I don't know if it's going to be this cycle, but if I had to buy stock in two coaches, I would say Sumrall, Tulane, and Sean Lewis at South Dakota State, San Diego State, excuse me.
So, Taylor, there's a program that a few years ago was all about the big splashes and being as flashy as possible. And then after that didn't really work out to the full success they wanted. They decided to go get a guy who was very well known and very popular, but more of just kind of a hard-nosed coach and more, I think, of what they need. And that was Texas A&M. And I'm wondering how many people take a cue and go for the splash versus the substance, in some cases with all of these various coaching jobs. But you've seen A&M for a very long time. How different does this feel from even when you've seen them at their best previously?
Mike Elko was. It's funny if you go back and think about Texas A&M fans revolting to make sure that Stoops from Kentucky does not get that job, and how quickly that's been turned around. And that A&M fans, I think, feel appreciative that there's an adult in the room. That towards the end with Jimbo, it just felt like a little bit of a circus, and all of the issues that they had with A&M, it was the roster turnover. That was the beginning of NIL, and they were going out and they were securing top 1 or 2 or 3 recruiting classes, but spending a ton of money. And then you look up the next year and all of that money was wasted because those guys are no longer in the program. And now it feels like they've solidified themselves. Are you going to find a Mike Elko in this class? Maybe. I think there are a couple of the guys that I just mentioned. Do any of these programs, and I'm talking about the top level, like an LSU or Florida, do any of them take somebody that's more based on substance and merit at maybe it's at a group of 6 level, as opposed to we've got to go get somebody like a Brian Kelly, for example, that was never a fit for LSU, spent his entire career in the Midwest, and go all the way back to his opening press conference, or not the opening press conference, but the opening pep rally when he's in the gym at LSU and he's got this fake Southern drawl, and you're thinking, this is going to be a disaster. And it was. I mean, how he handled that program and how inauthentic it felt, I think it's fair to say it was a disaster and a terrible hire by LSU. And so now for LSU, as they restart, I think they're right there with Florida on trying to, and maybe even more so at LSU, trying to find somebody that has a little bit of cachet to their name. Lane Kiffin, it's funny. I mean, his name pops up for every job right now that it's at the highest level. I think Lane Kiffin would take the LSU job. I don't know that he would take Florida, and that's just my speculation. But it will be interesting to see if Kiffin leaves, just the continued carousel of what happens where. I think, again, going back to Sumrall at Tulane, he is really well positioned because of his experience in the South for one of these SEC jobs. I don't think it's LSU, but Florida or potentially Ole Miss, if that opens up, I think he'd be a fit.
I don't know if you saw this, but Chris Vanini wrote an article and released it today, theathletic.com, about John Sumrall, who he's known when at Tulane, from championships to pallets of peanut butter. I'll send you a link if you haven't seen it, and then I'll put it in the chat room as well, because he does seem to have, like, not perfect, because I don't know if anyone's perfect, but seems like that is a really good match. And if it's not LSU, then I'm sure somebody, and I want to see Tulane, of course, hold on to him if they can too. So, Taylor, with all that's going on, and there are games that we saw this past weekend too, which one, in your opinion, I'm going to do Big 12 first, in your opinion, was the best win? Was it BYU coming back from Iowa State? Was it Cincinnati continuing their run? Utah destroyed Colorado. Which one do you think was the best win?
I don't know if it was the best one, but I'll tell you the one that surprised me most was Houston.
Okay.
And I have been a Houston supporter and a Willie Fritz supporter and believer in Willie Fritz, but I thought that this was too big of a leap for them. I thought with the way that they played against Texas Tech and a sort of top of the conference roster, I thought that showed that they're not quite there yet to compete for the league, but that this is still a much improved team. And I remember saying back with you guys all the way back in August that I thought this team had a chance to be maybe the biggest surprise. And I meant like 7 or 8 wins, that they would get to a bowl game and turn around from last year, where I believe they were either 4-8 or 5-7 a year ago. But the way that they went on the road and the way that they won, go look at the box score of that game. This was not fluky that they won that game. Now, they almost blew it late. Arizona almost came back. But Connor Wegman going for over 300 yards of total offense and making big plays running the football, over 100 yards on the ground against Arizona State. I don't know. That to me was the one that surprised me most. I thought that would be a game that Arizona State would win and win handily at home. But Houston now, they've solidified themselves. Look at the schedule the remainder of the way for Houston. I don't know that there's a challenge left for them. The toughest game left, you could say, is Baylor, but I'm not sure that Dave Aranda hasn't been fired by the last game of the season. And what sort of effort does Baylor play with for the final game of the season right after Thanksgiving? So I think it's totally possible that we see Houston in the Big 12 championship. I think the same thing for Cincinnati, which, how about those two teams? 3 years ago, they were in the American Conference, and now fast forward right there in the mix for the Big 12 championship, and they will both be playing meaningful football for the month of November.
The Big 12 has a knack for doing that. TCU, was good. They didn't win the championship outright, but when they came in, they were good pretty much right away. The gift of the Big 12 is that you could be a competitor in like a minute if you do it right. And it seems like everybody, BYU, everybody but UCF so far in that little group has hit well. Taylor, if you were a program that hadn't fired your coach yet, would you be willing to sit it out and sustain the beating through next year just because it's going to be really hard to get in the mix, especially if you're a program like Auburn, say, and may not get the guy that you really want because there are 4 other SEC jobs open?
Yeah, it's a good question. I would say for Auburn, no, I would not fire Hugh Freeze yet, because I think Auburn's roster top down is really competitive, and I think they're just a quarterback away from being a pretty good SEC team. I think that's not the only issue that they have. But you think about the weapons they have at receiver, they've got a really good defensive front. To me, I don't think it's been enough time for Hugh Freeze to fire him yet. I would say one more year, and they need to hit on a quarterback. The last 2 transfer portal quarterbacks, it just has not been very good for Auburn at all. On the other side of that, we'll use Baylor as the example again. If you are staring apathy in the face with your fan base, Auburn, for example, there's no apathy. They're going to show up next year. They're going to be dialed in, ready to go. It doesn't matter. They're going to be dialed in the rest of this season. Baylor, on the other hand, I think that's one where I hate this time of year. I know firings impact a number of people. We talk about the firings and the buyouts and how that impacts the head guy, and that's great. But there are so many people's lives and families' lives that get impacted by this stuff, and that is not lost on me. However, I think it's time to make a change in Waco. I think you go back to the Kansas State game that Baylor wins, and in the second half, there's like 1,000 people in the stands. And I think the way that they're playing and sort of the lack of sense of urgency, it just looks like a team that I don't know that they really care. And I don't know that that's 100% fair to those kids, but you guys know better than I do. I don't know how excited Baylor fans are and how, from an NIL perspective and fundraising perspective, how fired up is your fan base if you've got to run it back one more year?
There's no excitement, Taylor. I used the word malaise the other day, and I think everybody agreed that was kind of the best way to sum it up. So, yeah, there's no juice right now. There's no we'll just wait till we get this recruit. There's none of that going on. So, yeah, it just feels like it's kind of a lost cause at this point, but we'll see how Mack Rhodes handles all of that. But yeah, there's no energy around the program. The least amount that I've seen in 10 plus years. And that's the only time it was comparable was when they were going through the entire scandal. But even then people still cared. They were just angry and, sad and whatever else, but I've never seen it quite like this. So we'll see on that. Taylor, man, there's only so much time, but I guess kind of what do you make coming out of this weekend as far as the league race goes for the Big 12? Arizona State, Sam Leavitt can't stay healthy. Neither can Jordan Tyson. Texas Tech going to Manhattan where K-State looks kind of feisty all of a sudden. What do you make of the race? Is it BYU or bust, or is Utah going to have something to say? Where are you on all that?
Yeah, it's interesting. For our show Inside the 12 tomorrow, we're going to sort of talk through this on scenarios, and the league has said for forever they really want to get to two teams in the college football playoff. I think this is another year where that doesn't happen. I think you're seeing the number of upsets that we've seen down the stretch. I think that'll continue. I think you will have some teams and spots. Let's look at Texas Tech this week against Kansas State, right? That's a game that Texas Tech with Baron Morton back, you would think that they win, but Kansas State the last 2 weeks have played a lot better versus TCU and Baylor. And so could we see Texas Tech lose this week? Absolutely. I think some combination of BYU, Cincinnati, Texas Tech, now you got to throw Houston in the mix. Is Dan Pierre healthy for Utah? All those teams at the top, a lot of them play one another, right? We get BYU and Tech next week in a massive game. I think if there's one scenario that you're hoping for, if you're a fan of the league, to get two teams into the playoff, it is some combination of those teams. You need one to win out. Let's use like a Texas Tech, for example, and then whoever plays them in the Big 12 championship gets there with, well, it doesn't matter if they win. You need Texas Tech to get there with just the one loss, lose in the Big 12 championship, and then you have the winner and Texas Tech that get in. I think that's probably your only scenario where the league gets two teams in.
And right now, based on the fact BYU's playing them, not this week, as you mentioned, next week, that would be like that twosome, with all due respect to Cincinnati and even Houston, would be a team that is getting a lot of attention, just came off a classic routing Iowa State in the second half, down by whatever it was. So that's kind of the combination there.
And I need to put some respect on Cincy's name, because I keep forgetting to mention them. I go BYU or bust. Well, hell, they're 5-0 too, so I should also include them. I just want to mention that.
Yeah, and the one that Houston is the one. Just people that are listening to this, go look at Houston's schedule the rest of the way.
Oh, yeah.
There is a very clear path that they are 11-1. Their only loss is Texas Tech, and now you're looking at. It's a very similar scenario that what happened with SMU last year. If they are 11-1, by that point, they're probably hovering around the top 10 when they get to the end of the season. And then if they were to lose the Big 12 championship to a Texas Tech or a BYU, whoever it is the committee going to leave them out at 11-1 and punish them for having played in a conference championship? To me, that's the scenario that I know the committee does not want, because I think you would be looking at a very similar type team with Houston that was probably a year ahead of schedule, and maybe the schedule was a little fortunate for them. But gosh, if they're 11-1 and lose the Big 12 championship, I don't know how you leave them out.
Well, both those schools were fighting the same battle for the longest of time when they were eliminated in the race to get into the Big 12. So that would be kind of a nice Cinderella story too. Thank you, Taylor. What game do you have this week?
I'm back up at UConn. So I've got UAB and UConn, and my Owls beat UConn last week. So on the one hand, very happy for Rice. On the other hand, we'll see what kind of mood Coach Mora's in. That's 3 overtime losses for UConn this year. 5-3, all 3 losses on the road in overtime. Kind of unbelievable.
Enjoy it. Thank you very much, sir. Appreciate your time. Thanks for jumping on with us. That's Taylor McHargue, CBS